that's all of us. Maybe just for all of you, I will again welcome you to the Vilenica. I am really saddened, really disappointed that we cannot do this in person in Slovenia, because we were really. I think that this year that we really made a good festival with. We invited a lot of younger, or let's say very interesting artists and writers, and we were really looking forward to meeting all of you and to discuss with you, to have a glass of wine with you, and to welcome you to Ljubljana and to beautiful Krasts in Slovenia. But then, of course, the pandemic came, and we kind of decided that everything will go on the internet because, like I said, in Slovenia, things are quite uncertain. We really don't know what will happen from week to week. And at the moment, we kind of live this beautiful, nice summer in Slovenia. But like I said, the cases are rising again. The epidemic seems to be getting worse from month to month. And I really don't know what will happen. So I think that the safest way right now is the Zoom discussion. However, I think that Zoom's discussions can never replace the real thing. And I really believe and hope that we will see you in Slovenia some other time. I would like to, of course, welcome you in the name of the jury. I am the president of the jury of Literary Festival Vilenica. And this is my first year serving as the president, and already everything went to the toilets. So I'm not really that happy about that. But we will try to make this debate as lively as it can be. Like I told you, I wrote all of you 2 questions because I really don't know how long everything will be going on in this situation. By video conferences, everything is quite different, and I hope that we don't have any technical difficulties. But I will. I wrote for everybody 2 questions. But you can, of course, if you have something to say to the debate, if you have different opinion or something to add to the problem at hand, you can, of course, freely join us and tell your opinion. So this is for the public that is watching this. Welcome to the first roundtable discussion. Today we have here Antonic coming from Austria, Marek Šindelka coming from Czech Republic, Krystyna Dąbrowska coming from Poland, Volha Hapejeva coming from Belorussia, and Aušra Kaziliūnaitė. Did I pronounce that somewhat correctly? How do you spell your surname?
Kaziliūnaitė.
Kaziliūnaitė. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks.
Kaziliūnaitė. So from Lithuania. We will be talking about the changes that happened in the literary field in last, let's say, 30 years. But like I said before, because we are kind of we're roughly the same age, born around the 80s, and I don't think that we really can discuss about the changes, about the history, or don't really want to discuss about history in that way. So I kind of designed this round table that we will be talking about literature now. How is it now? What are the themes? What is the style of the literature now? And from this, I believe that it will be self-evident what changes actually happened. But I can really start with Thomas, because you are literary historian in a way. You are literary critic. You're also a multimedia artist. You're a poet, musician, writer, filmmaker. And when we are talking about changes in the arts in the last 30 years, I think that you have the privilege to follow that closely, because there were very important or very profound changes in the arts in the last 30 years, especially in the film making, in video art, in the music, how it's distributed, how it's listened to, how we watch movies today, how we watch series. But this are the same profound changes. Did the same profound changes happen in the literature, in your opinion, or is that because the movie, the video, and the music is more based on technology? Maybe those changes were more profound there than in literature. What do you believe?
Well, I can only speak about the section of literature that I'm following very precisely, like the field I'm working in, not really mainstream. For example, I think in mainstream prose writing, for example, it is not as radical as in the experimental field. That I think the last 30 years, especially the last 15, 20 years, it opened up very much that poets, writers started to use more multimedia approaches, working in several disciplines. And I'm talking about like the German language world now that I'm following closely. And of course, this has a lot to do with the internet world, and but I think experimental literature got just more open, and I myself, for example, I'm coming actually from music, so I started my career as a musician, and how I got into poetry was that I just started at some point to write song lyrics, for example. So all this is coming together, and also in terms of the history of literature, I think it's like exactly almost 30 years ago that the Vienna Poetry School was founded. And this is a school that is really fostering this interdisciplinary approach and wants to go away from like seeing like disciplines like film, literature, music divided. So it should be combined, and I think that's only natural.
Yeah, but I also believe that there are some changes that happen probably in the themes of literature. I believe that this kind of there was some profound change. I think that Marek, I read about your work, what you're doing. You have the focus of your writing is very contemporary life. It's the loneliness, the crisis of communication, the personal feelings and lives of young people. Does the theme of your work, you think, in your opinion, require this kind of a new structure and stylistic approach to capture all of this? Or is the so-called traditional literature, or let's say realistic literature, enough even when we write about today's experience that are quite different that, let's say, even 10 years, 15 years ago?
Yeah. About this mixing of genres, it's happening in the Czech Republic right now. Like in poetry field, there are many writers who experiment with music, poetry, like osmosis, or for a lack of better words, and that happens also at the art schools, Prague's art schools, like FAMU and others, and it's very fresh. I would say it's very like something is happening, and maybe as usual we are a little bit late in comparison with Austria, Germany, and other countries. Let's say more Western countries, but yeah, it's always the same with our culture, that we have like 10 years we are 10 years late, I would say. But to your question, definitely yes. I believe that for every single book I have written, I had to somehow develop a brand new language. I had to, because those novels and also compilations of short stories, but also my first book was a compilation of a volume of poetry. So there are different genres, but always it was like in the beginning or initially it was like a tabula rasa. I was standing in front of complete void and emptiness, and I had to somehow develop something new, and especially with a book which I like to call something like a literary mutant almost. It's something in between poetry, prose, and also short stories. Not only prose like a novel, but it's fragmented, and it's a very strange structure. And the book is called Map of Anna, and it's about a character which is not present actually in the text, but there are some traces of it, some hints how to think about the character. And it's a love story, but without the main protagonist. And I wanted to write it as contemporary as possible. So I had to deal with the language a lot, because it has changed. It has changed profoundly, thanks to the social media, thanks to, I don't know, the rapidness of the world. And somehow I want to capture all this in the book, and the outcome was very, very strange, but I think people like it somehow. But yeah, but that's one of the main like challenges of literature nowadays, I would say, to rethink its own firepower, like its own techniques and so on and so on. So that's that's it.
Yeah, because the literature nowadays, we mentioned this for 2 times now, it's multimedia kind of a literature, kind of a that combines everything, especially of course the visual art, but maybe that's a question for you, Krystyna. I think that the literature in the past 3 decades was very much influenced by visual media, but mostly I would believe by movies, by films, and not so much by, I don't know, paintings and the traditional fine arts, as much as it was, especially in the, I would say, in the time of modernism, when, you know, the artists kind of tried everything, every arts. Nowadays, especially in Slovenia, I find that writers don't really care, don't really go to the exhibitions of fine arts or anything. They are watching movies and TV series, listening to music, maybe going to theater, but, you know, not the visual media kind of disappeared. You, in one of your interviews, you kind of made the parallel between your writing and the paintings, and I was wondering, is the connection between the traditional visual arts still alive in Poland, or as a whole, or more in your poetry because of your education, because you are you graduated from the graphics departments of the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw?
You know, it's not. It's a bit more complicated. This citation you put in the question, it's not really what I said. It's something that was said by a critic after my first book appeared, so it was quite a long time ago. And I must say, I disagree totally with this. Because yes, I graduated from Academy of Art, but in my case, it's more the question that I think with images, and I'm not so much inspired by traditional paintings or visual arts, more, if we are saying about it, is what you mentioned, more by movies or by photography, because I like movement. And in these words you cited, it's like the comparison of my poems to, I don't know, still lifes or portraits.
Yeah.
I don't think it is so, because for me, like, still life is something really frozen, and this is not something that I like so much. And you are right that during the modernism and also in Poland, like, you know, after the war and until, I don't know, 70s, 80s, for this most important Polish poets, visual arts as such were very important, like for Zbigniew Herbert, I don't know, Greek art and painting in general. But now I think it's more, first of all, like daily life, you know, it is very important just to catch the images of daily life, of personal life. And I think in Polish poetry, it's the poetic image is important. Like many poets who use very various styles, they usually write in a very concrete, specific way with like, the poems are really visual, which doesn't mean like they are based on paintings, but they just speak a bit like a movie to the visual imagination. And also what Marek said, there is also a mingling of everything. So these visual arts come back in form of some kind of art books. For example, there is a Polish poet, very well known, Marcin Świetlicki. Now he's in his 60s, I guess, or late 50s. And he published a very beautiful book of poems with paintings made by contemporary Polish painter Marcin Maciejewski. And it's not just like poetry book illustrated, but it's kind of a dialogue between the drawings and paintings and the poems. And also another poet published, you know, poems with photographs, and it's also kind of a dialogue. So in this sense, these visual arts are alive, but I cannot think of many poets who are inspired by, you know, but it's a bit like in Slovenia, that not many poets would go to, I don't know, exhibition and then write about the paintings or so on. Yeah, so I guess it's more the question of general visual quality of poetry in Poland.
But you don't believe that this takes anything away from the poetry because it's based more on visual images than on the language itself?
You know, I think it must be combined. Like the language is language is like the basic tool. And also in Polish poetry now, it's difficult to talk about the general image, because we have so many now, like the styles and schools and fashions, and it's like, you know, it's very, very, very various and mixed. And we have very strong, many poets write even the poetry that can be called linguistic. They are experimenting very strongly. I don't do this so much, but I think it must be somehow it must be combined. You know, of course, the poem cannot be just like a description or something like this. But I like poems that are like a bit, I don't know, imaginistic, or I like this quality in poetry. I must say that, for example, I don't really like so much the French poetry, which tends to be like, I mean, contemporary French poetry, and probably I am making big simplification, but I think it's becoming too abstract and too, you know, too philosophical, but in an abstract way. So I guess, yeah.
May I add something?
Yeah, of course.
I think I think it's already there, and it always has been. Like in the language itself, all the music, the rhythm. It's a part of the language always. Like, and also, which is for me, let's say universal, is something, again, for lack of better words, I would call composition. It's in, you can see it everywhere. In movies, you have to somehow compose the whole structure of the script, and also the composition of the image, moving image. The same goes for photography and painting. Some balance of colors and objects and so on and so on. And that very same thing goes for poetry for me, and for prose definitely. And those things, I think language is something which binds all those things together, because that's our main tool. We think through this filter or structure or whatever. So for me, it's already and has been there for always. Like, so
Yes.
So that's only natural that people now use this, like young artists, poets, and so on, and mix those things together. But
yeah, that's true. I agree totally.
So if we go to the kind of a social changes that are happening actually also right now, we kind of see that there's been a lot of changes in the whole field of arts, with the feminist movement, with the Me Too movement, with we can see that more women are getting published and are getting recognition that they deserved and were kind of not getting beforehand. And Volha, your research is in the fields of sociology of the body and the gender issues. So maybe the question is right for you. Do you see that these changes that I just described, do you see these changes in Belarus literature? Are there any specifics in the Belarus literature and that are different from kind of other parts of Europe or the world? And do you see that feel that these changes have the same consequences for Belarus women writers than they have for, I don't know, women writers from the Western world, or is there again some kind of a divide?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. First of all, I should say that it's not easy to be a writer, a poet, or a person who works in literature in Belarus in general, for a woman or for a man. But sure, I think even like if the situation is not that great for both of genders, or more genders, if we take into account some other possibilities of gender spectrum. Sure, women have double burden anyway, because Belarus is still a patriarchal society. But I should say that, yeah, with Me Too movement, we also witness some kind of openness to this topic, and there are also some topics started to appear in mass media. Sure, I'm talking about social networks, first of all, because sure, in official mass media discourse, such things don't appear. But I also doubt that our younger generation reads a lot official newspapers or watch television, because most of them are in social networks. But also some other positive things which I see, and I'm happy that we can witness the discussion of such very maybe specific topics like feminitives in the language. Yeah, for example, because Belarusian language is Slavonic language, and we also have this endings for women if we denote them per profession. And you can also find these discussions in some internet platforms. Sure, lots of negative comments below and it's better not to read it if you have not very good nerves. Yeah, but on the other hand, also, for example, some of my friends who are activists in feminist movement, they also start different programs. And for example, now we have still the list of banned profession for women, which was adapted in 1932, and it's still here. And it includes, for example, 181 profession which you as a woman cannot take. For example, you cannot be a carpenter, you cannot be a tractor driver, you cannot be a metro train driver, and lots of other things. And sure, I mean, and now they make campaigns to eliminate this list and to do something about it. As for literature, I think that now it's easier for younger poets and writers to speak about their problems connected with gender or like with their bodies. You can see that in poems or in novels which women write. And also what is important, I think, is that the LGBTQ writers also can get the voice, and at least they can talk about it, can write in their works. Sure, it doesn't mean that the society accepts it, but I should say that Belarusian literature is quite kind of restricted sphere. And maybe the older generation is a little bit also conservative for such topics, but they also conservative as far as I understood about not only about like gender specific topics, but in general, when younger generation openly speak about their traumas, what they experience, maybe some violence in family or something, or that they were hurt by somebody psychologically, the older generation really doesn't want to accept it. It's interesting because they say like, oh, now everybody's talking about their traumas and like they're also poor and we never. And I think like, for the older generation, it's a bit like they're, because they didn't have such a possibility, it wasn't common to talk about such things. Now as if like they, not envy, but something like this. Why? Yeah.
I can imagine, because what you described is more or less the same, I think, that in Slovenia. So, yeah. But what we see in the last couple of years and what I wanted to open with this debate is, of course, after some kind of a postmodern cynicism and more kind of a commercial concerns of the last decades, there's a rise of this kind of a political engagement among the writers and literature. Is more connected to, to movements that seek societal and cultural change. And you, Aušra, you participate very actively in movements for human rights and calls for equality. Is that also reflected in your work? I am specifically interested in the question of activism in literature, that is, where does the politics end or begin? Where is the line between the politics and literature? Is it enough to write about social issues, or do you have to be, as an intellectual, politically active? Or on the other hand, of course, is it enough to be politically active but never open those questions about politics and contemporary society in your work? What is the line here?
Oh, it's a lot of serious questions, Thank you for being so kind and generous. So actually, it's very important questions, and even for myself, I using a lot of topics somehow related with social issues, and also, some people, I guess, could call it political writings. But at the same time, I always feeling somehow uneasy about it. And, you know, because I can agree with Walter Benjamin when he just say this thing, you know, that art for art is like really fascism. And I guess I can agree with that. But at the same time, it also, you know, in these times, and especially if we are talking like about world poetry scene and also world movie scene and art in general, it's also sometimes can be not easy to talk about these topics because in some culture fields, for example, in my own country, Lithuania, maybe situation is a little bit different because it's still in my country, it's like, you know, not very popular to use all of this, you know, topics like LGBTQ plus movement and also, you know, like criticize sexism and also economical inequality and all of this kind of stuff. So it's kind of here in Lithuania. But in general, if we are talking, for example, about poetry scene in United States or even in some Asian countries, you know, situation is totally different. And, you know, and sometimes we are quite Eurocentric, and we're trying to forget, you know, things that are happening around, and yeah, so it's a lot of differences. And for me, for example, okay, in Lithuania, when I'm trying to touch all these topics, it's still uneasy to do, and it's some kind of maybe not so big risk comparing with some countries in Africa or in Asia, you know, but still you are kind of risking, you know, with some social relations and also, you know, yeah, so you still have some kind of a risk. But for example, in some countries, to touch and to talk about all this kind of important issues, it's also becoming, you know, faster and faster, some kind like part of mainstream. So always when we are talking about this kind of writings, we also dealing with very important question, from where all these writings comes. And this is kind of strange because we think that we are living in so global world, but at the same time, at some point, you should ask yourself from what kind of perspective you are writing and how it's, you know, related with this culture field, your own culture field, your country's culture field, or if you are living, traveling, affected of different countries, it's also somehow related. And for example, today I had very interesting situation in the heart of Vilnius, you know, capital of Lithuania. I was just standing in front of Vilnius Cathedral. It's kind of like, you know, tourist attraction, sightseeing, #1 place in Vilnius. And yeah, my partner was just, you know, filming me for Vilenica readings, actually, online readings, because I was late, you know. I was working a lot with my philosophy PhD thesis and doing a lot of stuff. So I just had a lot of things going on. So, okay, I decided that now I have around 20 minutes before my work, just, you know, to make this short video for readings. and I was just standing in front of cathedral, and my partner was just, filming me. And I was reading my poem about a homeless child. And at the same moment, like a homeless person just came to us and was interrupting us and asking us, like, annoying questions and acting a little bit rude and all this kind of stuff. And I found myself in this situation in capitalistic world and in my busy schedule and all this kind of stuff. But at some point, I can write about, human rights, and I can criticize, this economical and social cultural situation. Mm-hmm. But at some point, I also can ask a homeless person, just maybe, could you go away? We are trying to record, something, and actually to record poetry about, socially engaged topics. So it's a very hard topic, what you asked now.
Well, thank you. I think that you opened kind of a really, really good questions, because I know that I send you the questions that are really so broad and so sometimes so specific that you can always answer it with more questions. And I believe that we can go on the next stage. I'm really interested because you said how does this kind of a globalization or the world happen in your own country, these relations. And Thomas, you are also literary critic, historian, and your research was on the influences of American Beat generation on literature in German. And I'm quite interested in your findings, and also why did you decide to kind of to research this? Is this something that still has some kind of a long-lasting implications for the German literature nowadays? Because I think that the most important thing that every young or every artist in any moment is, how do you relate to the history of literature in your own country, or on the influences that are that actually are yours, and they're sometimes are from your country, from your national literature, and sometimes they are really not, or they came to your national literature and then influenced you. So I know. Sorry, this is again
more than one question.
Yeah.
Well, I discovered this subject for me more or less coincidentally, because I'm coming from German studies, and I was writing a book about the Austrian playwright Wolfgang Bauer, and at some point discovered that he was like heavily influenced by the Beat generation in the 60s, writing very like hyper-realistic plays like Magic Afternoon. And that reminded me actually that I also discovered the Beat generation like Burroughs and Jack Kerouac when I was like 16, 17, and then forgot about all that because it was like fascinating. But then, I forgot about that because I was like focusing very on German literature and Austrian literature. So Bauer actually brought me to that subject again, and then I was thinking that was also like the first time due to this research that I was visiting the United States. That's now like 10 years ago, because I never really had the interest to go there, but then I got curious, and this is how this whole Beat generation thing started, because in San Francisco I met a lot of like old Beats like Michael McClure and Ruth Weiss, Jack Hirschman, and I started to look for like transnational connections between German language literature and the Beats, and found actually a lot, because it's hidden, but it's very present if you take a closer look, and especially if you talk to contemporary writers who are like our generation, like born around the 80s, late 70s. You don't really see it at the first look, but if you talk to them, everybody suddenly says like, and you would never expect that, like, oh, Kerouac, of course, it's one of my favorite authors, or like, yeah, I'm totally into Burroughs and stuff like that, or Ginsberg, of course. So yeah, I just found that fascinating, that this Beat Generation thing is not actually a historical era, like epoch from the 50s and 60s. It's still ongoing, actually, underneath the surface. And yeah, of course, it also has a well, I wouldn't say I'm influenced by the Beat Generation in my own poetry, but it's very inspiring to, for example, experiment with techniques like the cut up by Burroughs, or long lines. Also, because I'm a musician, as I said before, mixing music and poetry, and on stage also, which is, of course, which has its roots in jazz and poetry from the 50s that was developed on the West Coast. Yeah, and also certain philosophical approaches. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. With this question, I kind of try to open the whole theme of this conversation, which for me is, I don't know if you agree, but we will see that soon, is that today's literature, or at least what we say, we will see that in the discussion, what we believe as a globalized world, we kind of create globalized literature. Because I read about one of your work, your debut novel, Marek, which is called Aberrant, that it's described as a connection of crime story, horror story inspired by the Japanese tradition of kaidan, ecological revenge fantasy, and Siberian shamanism. And to me, that was a really, again, a good description of a novel. I, as a publisher, always enjoy this kind of descriptions that tell everything and nothing at the same time. But also, it kind of shows how today's literature is kind of influenced from all over the world. That you make your own tradition. That you don't really just rely on Czech tradition, but also look for the other tradition. How do you see this connection, this interplay of global and local? Are national literatures something that belongs to the old world? And are we living in this kind of a new age of global literature, or you don't agree with that?
I say I agree, but for me, it's the description of the novel is crazy. It's all those things are like there. It's in this way I can't. Yeah, it's there, but for me, the book is one big monstrous poem. Like it's a huge lifelike almost form I created, because I was very young, very naive, and I started with something it was very almost like a neurosis, this first novel of mine. I was a poet back then, and this story somehow happened. I don't know how exactly, but initially it was a one single haiku-like poem, like very small, like an atom or a molecule of something. And it was about plants, about flowers, because there was this case in concerning Czech scientists imprisoned in New Zealand for smuggling rare species of plants, of orchids actually. and it was a little bit of a international affair, let's say. It was a huge problem, and I wrote this haiku on this topic, and then it started to somehow to live on its own almost. It somehow grew to a form of a like a volume of poetry, but those poems were, I'd say, they were very poor. I didn't like them, so I rewrite it as a short story. Then it turned to be a chapter of a novel, and so on and so on. So it grew as something almost like a plant, and all those influences were there. Those things were soaked like in a spongy or something, because I studied back then. I studied at the Charles University. I studied culture studies and anthropology, and I was always fascinated by myths and the local stories from many different countries, and similar patterns which are to be found in all those cultures, and have similar structures, and so on and so on. So that was the reason. And for me, to answer your question finally, sorry, for me it's here. I can reach out and take what is there, and the world absolutely is smaller than it used to be. It has grown, it has shrinked somehow because of or due to technologies, due to planes and other means of travel and transportation, and also transportation of thoughts, of mind patterns, and so on and so on, and transportation of myths and legends and so on. It's all here now, available for a writer, and I don't want to, because there are, of course, like theories that this is also exploitation of all those things, and so on and so on. But for me, this is literature. This is always about stealing something, about peeping to somewhere where you don't belong, where somewhere in other people's lives, in their thoughts, in their feelings, emotions, and it's like it's one big theft of other people's lives. That's for me literature, and it always was the same, I'd say. Like yeah.
I think that this is quite interesting, because you, when you described how your poem evolved into a novel, I think that because mostly when we talk about literature and globalized literature, we think about novel, because novel is this kind of a very commercial form of literature. Everybody reads, they read. In Slovenia, people don't really read short stories, the poetry. We have more poets than readers of poetry. But if you talk about novels, everybody reads novels. And Krystyna, I think that I was fascinated by your poetry, which is very, there is a lot of traveling in your poetry. You travel a lot, and then you write about this kind of different countries. You're also a translator, which is, of course, always somebody that that kind of opens the reader to the new possibilities, to the new horizons. And what do you think, how does this influence your writing when you are a traveler and also like I said, translator? And also, do you believe that poetry is harder to be globalized because it's very based in language, it's more based sometimes in language than the novel? It's more harder to translate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, many important questions again. So first I will say that what Marek said, it's very important, for me, that when you write, you're trying to imagine or to get into the place where you not belong. So for example, this this thing that is going on now in States, this like for me a bit obsession with something that is called cultural appropriation. That, for example, you cannot, if you are not black, you cannot, you know, take a voice of a black person to write and so on. I think it's just killing of literature and of imagination. And it is with traveling, for me, this is most important, you know, not to describe, I don't know, beautiful or ugly things I've seen, but somehow to confront what I know with something I don't know, and what is close to me with something very strange. And somehow, for me, many interesting things happen on this meeting point. Something close to me meets with something strange, and then somehow inspiration comes. And also translation is about this. I have to get into somebody else's skin, and to use my personality, but also to get into somebody else's personality, and somehow to try to find a dialogue between this. And in Poland, it's for me, it was always very annoying, because we are concentrated on, you know, Polish writers, Polish poets, Polish novelists, and so on. And for example, when I used to write reviews, and I wanted to write about like a volume of poetry that was translated, very often I could not find a place to write, you know, because everybody wanted to just to publish texts about Polish writers. But for me, it's very important to like confront myself with the poets from other cultural backgrounds, and I translate from English, but I also try to translate from Hebrew. And this concept of national literature for me is just, you know, there was never something like this, because even like in traditional literature, you have, I don't know, Bible, which is translated, and Shakespeare, who was translated, and Greek, and everything, it was all translated. And all these classical national writers, they were educated on this, you know, very important cultural texts that were translated. So, and you also asked if the poetry is more difficult. Yes, yeah, well, of course, because it's, I would say that poetry, and also this kind of prose that is like poetry. In Poland, we have many writers like, I don't know, Bruno Schulz or Gombrowicz, who used such a condensed language that it's the same, like the degree of difficulty. So of course it's much more difficult to make it globalized. Sometimes it is impossible. Sometimes there are poets that work so deep in the language that you just cannot translate. But I think you have to try, because it's like, it's just an adventure, and sometimes you just have to find something in your language that is like an equivalent. It doesn't have to be a mirror, but just like so it's an adventure.
No, that's a nice thought, that translating is an adventure, I believe. So Volha, you translate from Chinese and Japanese, and to me always there was a very interesting question, because when I read now the novels for a couple of years, the novels that are from sometimes Asia, Africa, or other, we say, third world countries, I find that when they are nominated for, I say, international Booker, they always seem kind of the same. We want to, as a Western readers, we kind of want to see the same in them, the same exotic themes, the same traditional, this kind of a society that we really don't have anymore, and this kind. And I was always wondering, when we talk about, because I think that the aesthetics in the Asia especially is quite different than the aesthetics in Europe. is a great literature, that is great in Asia, also great in the West? Does it work when you translate something that is masterpiece in, let's say, Japanese, and you can translate it here, and we can recognize this as a masterpiece? Or do we translate only literature from other countries that speak to us, to Western readers? And how does also, of course, translating poetry from those languages connects to your writing? Can it connect? And if it does it connect in difference or in similarities?
Thank you. Lots of questions. So I'll try to be quick. I'm not like, you know, I translate poetry, and it's another thing, so I don't work with prose. And as for the Japanese literature, poetry, I translated a contemporary tanka poet, Marikona, and the 18th century haiku master, Kobayashi Isa. And also had acquainted with the poets from the beginning of the 20th century, Misuza Kaneko. And they are all very, very dear to me because they're close in their aesthetic to what I do or what is important to me, but I'm Belarusian. So I don't know, maybe in my previous life I was, or they were Belarusian in their previous life. Anyway, sure, the aesthetic is different, and you can, I mean, every book on translation or on culture on Asia will tell you about this. What I was personally surprised when I was working with haikus, for example, is that they just explore, or maybe even what they want to do with you is a little bit different, or not saying about the methods which are used. Yeah, for example, in haiku, you don't have to use any literary tropes. I mean, this is what is European poetry is famous for. Yeah, we use metaphors, metonymies, comparison, hyperbole, like all of this. And in haiku, you kind of it's bad style if you use something like this, because you have to be as close to nature as possible. And in nature, I mean, all these things are considered to be artificial. That's also why Japanese literature doesn't like rhymes, because for them rhyme is something artificial. It's not natural, it's not beautiful, you know. So even here you can see such dramatic changes between us, but nevertheless I think there's something which you're able to feel. It can be really universal, and that is why it is possible for Western readers, for European readers, to get into Japanese culture or literature. But again, I mean, it depends on your readiness to perceive it. And also the introduction which the translator or the author, whoever makes it possible for you, prepares you, because sure, without this background, sometimes it's really hard. I mean, you will be able to get it, but it will be just different level, but nobody says it's wrong, it's just different, you know. So why not? The other thing is, like, which maybe will return us a little bit to your first part of the question about visuality, is, for example, when we speak about Chinese poetry, for them also important hieroglyphs, and it is one level which you cannot translate, because they perceive poetry also on the visual level. Yeah, because the word tree or the word water for them also has this, you know, pictograms, like, and this is what definitely will be lost in translation. Yeah. So yeah, there are lots of differences also in terms of maybe topics, because Asians, I guess, they're a little bit closer to nature, especially Japanese ones. This Tanku poet, she's obsessed like with ecological things, and I was surprised, for example, when Tanko, which I translated, and I asked later her why does it mean? Because I didn't get. I mean, I thought, oh, is it a metaphor or something? The Tanko was something like snowless winter, the magnolia buds are opening. Isn't it hurtful? And I was thinking, why? And then she explained to me that because when there is not enough snow during winter, next spring, it is really not easy for the plants, for trees, to bloom, and they really can even maybe hurt on a physical level. And for me, that was like, wow. I mean, it's kind of biological poem, but at the same time, it has some, beauty, aesthetic, which is fantastic.
We talked, Krystyna previously said that she sometimes finds hard to find a place to review translated poetry in Poland. And Aušra, I think that I sent you the question about the translating of poetry into Lithuanian. So your book of selected poems, The Moon is a Pill, was published in English, but how is it with Lithuanian literature in the last 30 years? Did you experience a rise of translations to other languages? How is it with poetry specifically? Because in Slovenia we have, I can tell you from the standpoint of publisher, we have a less and less translated foreign poetry. We have a lot of novels and short stories and prose, but poetry is getting less and less translated into Slovenia. How is it in Lithuania? And of course, does this reflect in your work somehow?
Oh, sorry. I guess I didn't receive your questions, but I will try to do my best to answer it. So I think I am kind of exception in Lithuanian literature because my work is very widely translated. Now this translation to Slovenian language, it would be, so my poetry now is translated to 16 languages. And also, it's kind of rare in Lithuania because, Lithuania is quite a small country, and the first problem which occurs, for people is that it's not very easy to find good translators, professional translators, to translate directly from Lithuanian to our languages. And another problem is that usually, in many countries, it's not very easy to publish like a whole book of poetry from, very small unknown country. And so it's kind of, rare, but at the same time, nowadays, I think Lithuanian poetry gets like more and more translations, and it's more and more published widely and one of the reasons why, I guess, is that, Lithuanians traveling a lot, and also we have quite a huge diaspora around the world. And, it's kind of interesting situation because Lithuania was, became part of European Union quite late. And also, now Lithuania, it's independent, but before we also spent like, many years as part of Soviet Union. So the thing is that after Lithuanians get opportunity to travel because before it was not so easy to travel to Western world, for example, you know. Many Lithuanians just went to foreign countries, like especially Western countries, like very cheap work power. So, and I guess nowadays many children, you know, quite young Lithuanians living outside of Lithuania, for example, in the 20s or so, they starting to translate Lithuanian literature. So, for example, some of my translators in different countries were quite young, and they are very interested, like, you know, in this poetry, but it's like less traditional poetry, but it speaks to them, and also we want to translate it. And another thing is that I guess nowadays in Lithuania, now we have like more professionals working with, you know, this promotion of our culture, because before in Lithuania, you know, it was like a part of this strange kind of thinking, this kind of culture that poets, especially poets, were always was thinking about, okay, I am kind of, you know, writing my genius poetry, so it means that I'm just sitting here, you know, in this party, and someone should come to me and to invite me dance, you know. Yeah, and still in Lithuania we have this kind of, you know, culture, and but it's changing a little bit. And okay, Lithuanian poets and writers in general are quite shy, but you know, the situation changing. But at the same time, we're also dealing with this kind of problems that, for example, even in Lithuanian poetry is not like very commercial, successful field. But at the same time, you know, it's like many power relations working in this, you know, kind of like, you know, not very successful field. And it's very interesting. And for me, you know, I'm working with concepts from Michel Foucault philosophy and Gilles Deleuze philosophy. So for me, it's kind of interesting to watch, you know, this kind of inner circle and this power relations. And I guess this power relation situation worked for so many years in my country, and it was one of the main reasons why for so long time, usually, you know, Lithuanian poets translated to foreign languages were almost all male poets. And you know, and now the situation also changing step by step, and more, you know, people gets published, you know, not just like old and like very patriarchal machos. But before it was mainly like this. Yeah. So situation changing.
That is good, I believe. But since we are at the end of our discussion, now the question is for all of you. You can answer it or don't if you don't want to or don't know the answer. But I'm really, really interested in your opinion. We are really living in some kind of a, we experience the global event that is this pandemic of COVID-19. And we have the lockdown, the epidemics, the norm of social distancing. Do you believe that all of this will have a lasting effect on writing and doing arts? Or do you believe that all this will subside and we will go back to normal, whatever normal actually is?
Okay, I can say something.
Krystyna, yes?
I'm not really sure. I think there is one maybe possibility for poetry, because first I was a bit afraid, because of course in Poland, like probably everybody everywhere else, now the book market is totally unstable, and there no promotions, no festival, like online festivals, but nothing really happens in real life. So it's much more difficult to publish something, or you can even publish, but no reaction is coming.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think maybe for poets, it's kind of a chance, because in Poland, nobody nowadays reads poetry. And I think that in this situation of this isolation and lockdown and so on, maybe people who read books, but not necessarily poetry, they will maybe have more time or more inner concentration, or more even need for this kind of language, which is more intimate, even if it's even if these are poems on social issues. It's always more intimate than other kinds of art. But on the other hand, I think it's really difficult to make any kind of prognosis, because for me it's like even in a way disappointing that when things happen that we consider they are really like big things and shaking, like this pandemic, then very quickly everything can return to its old, to the old, how do you say?
Correct.
Yes, and you have to even sometimes count on some kind of change, but it's not so easy for things to change. And yeah,
I'd say that we, of course, the pandemic was something unpleasant and terrible in a way, but on the other hand, it also gave people something. I think it gave us some time to to contemplate, to spend time with with our families and so on. I spent wonderful 2 weeks with my daughters, and that was wonderful. But also, it's sometimes helps when we slow down, and that's I guess is also something with which has to do or which enables us to to think more, to feel more for other people maybe, and so on and so on. For me it was as a people who wasn't affected by the virus and so on and so on, I've seen it as an opportunity to to do something. And so it could be a very, like, in this existential or philosophical level, it could be something something good also, as it all,
Actually, when all these things started, we with Krystyna participated together in one festival in Sweden. So, and the crazy thing is that, and it was not first time when we met, but so, and the thing is that our events was totally cancelled, and we found ourselves stuck in Sweden.
in the north.
And so
with the moles.
Yes, so it was kind of strange situation, because at one day you kind of trying to relax yourself and to think what it gets normal tomorrow. It gets normal tomorrow. So now we should just wait, and but it didn't end it yet. and I'm not sure it's ending at some point, because you know, it's kind of like I can speak from this privileged position, you know, because I also have some savings. I'm also you know, spend this quarantine time just finishing my philosophy PhD thesis, and you know, and also my new book, and working on some postponed projects. But also, you know, I know that during this quarantine, some people, like, you know, people who delivering food, who works in, you know, so many works, and even people who sells food in grocery stores, we were just working, you know. And so from my point of view, it's a little bit like, you know, maybe cynical to say this thing, but, you know, maybe it's good for everyone just to stop everything and, you know, and to enjoy time, you know, with your relatives, your cats and dogs, and, you know, and to contact, because it's a lot of people just don't have this kind of privilege to do this. And also, you know, if we're talking about the United States, for example, I also read few articles about, you know, how it affected, you know, just the people with very low incomes, and also people in color, you know. The thing is that a lot of people just was, you know, working without this privilege to stop all these things. So, and some marginalized, you know, like groups, they just, you know, had very, very, you know, like bad situation without good like medical insurance situation and all this kind of stuff. So, and you know, this discrimination that was like very very visible even before quarantine, it gets worse. So, and it affects people, you know, who just didn't have very good positions before. And also I want to add just this one last thing, because when we are asking ourselves, or it's going to get back to normal, this situation, we're also kind of ignoring this thing that, you know, in this world, always we had like very unpleasant, very scary, and very dangerous things going on. But we just had before this privilege to ignore all these things that happened, like, you know, like wars, and also, you know, many things, like, you know, also nature disasters, and many things. And so I just would like to ask, you know, in this place, what is normal when we trying to think about, you know, this get back to normal.
Very good. Volha and Thomas, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can add that I'm a little bit pessimistic about the situation. And what's more is I think that this situation revealed hidden things with which different groups of people who do not really fit in the society or in the normal society. It revealed the fence with which we could put up. But I'm talking about, for example, very, very primitive or typical things is like, for example, when about the gay marriages, for example, or like a marriage between woman and a man, and if they're considered to be like partners, who is a partner. For example, if you live in different countries, the other person cannot really now come to you because you're not officially registered. And this is, you know, like the thing. Before Corona, it was okay. I mean, you know, but when it all appeared and the government started to really execute their power in a very ununderstandable sometimes way, so they introduce new rules which are not really clear, then they change the rules, then they decide who can come, who cannot come on different basis. For me, what I see now is mostly like new forms of discrimination. Example, when countries create those lists now, and for example, I was to be part in, because I was international selector for Povezuje festival, and although I have spent 1 year in Austria and I have Aufenthaltstitel from Austria, they said I cannot travel because I have a Belarusian passport and I haven't been in Belarus for a year, you know, and this is like very weird and very strange, and things like that, they're all around us. The other thing is, I think this, it's good, Marek said it gave us time or things to think, for people to stop and think, and I agree, but I think that it happens to people who have thought anyway, you know, but for people who never thought, this time really didn't add anything, and it's just will increase this level of distance, because also in shops or in the, yeah, I mean, you can understand that people are afraid, but still this alienation from the other person, and when they try to start looking at you as potential danger, I think it's really something not nice what's happening to humanity as it is, as to our human side. And I'm afraid that this can be very bad side effect. But maybe poetry and literature can do something to that.
No, can I add one small?
Of course.
No, because what Volha said is true, and in Poland, I don't want to really talk much about this because I'm getting too nervous, but our government, which is like very right-wing and for me terrible, used coronavirus situation, you know, for like manipulating the elections, for everything. It's too big a topic to be discussed now, but it's also, this pandemic is also like in more normal countries, you can just be terrified by the situation with people getting ill and so on. But in countries like Poland, you are also terrified by what politicians are doing with this. And like normal people, citizens are just helpless, you know. So, yeah.
Thomas, are you gonna add something? What do you believe?
Well, back to the original question, if something will change in literature, I think we're still in this whole pandemic, so we cannot really see where this is going and for how long this is going. And I agree with what has been said earlier, that in my position, I'm very far from an existential crisis right now. What I can say about my own writing is that, well, my writing has gotten into a crisis because I'm working since 2 years on a poetry book, which is called The United States of Absurdia, which is also where I'm my contribution for the festival is a part of that. And what happened the last months in the United States is so absurd that what I have written so far is far from being that absurd. So I'm really considering of rewriting the whole thing and have to think hard about that. But yeah, that's still not a big issue compared to what's going on.
Well, yeah, I kind of created this situation when we end on a pessimistic note, so that's on me, I guess. But I would say I agree with Thomas that we're still so deep into this pandemic that we cannot really say. I hope that political changes and societal changes won't get so pessimistic, or at least that if we talk about it and write about it and sometimes scream about it, we can still stop it or do something about it. And also, I must say that again, when I'm talking to you now, I'm very disappointed that you're not here in Ljubljana, that we are not all alive somewhere between the audience and so. And I really hope that I will see you someday in Ljubljana, in Slovenia, and meet you in person. And I'm really happy to have this conversation with you. I think that we've shown to the audiences that you're not just good writers, but also good thinkers and very interesting people. And I thank you for participating in this, and hope you are well and you'll stay well through the pandemic and of course on. And thank you very much, and have a nice evening, I guess.
Thank you too.
Thank you.